Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, April 14th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 142 days. The game against Michigan in 226 days. The spring game 1 day away now. Tony Gerdeman, we're here at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center as the Buckeyes are getting ready for that spring game. And after talking to Ryan Day earlier this week, there was a bunch of stuff we learned about. On yesterday's show, we talked about the quarterback who is not going to be playing, which is a significant change for the spring game. But, we talked about this a little bit with Kevin yesterday, but man, oh man, you don't have to read very far between the lines to get the feeling that they are looking very, very closely at the situation at offensive tackle. It feels like that maybe is the single biggest question, the single biggest concern facing this team right now. Let's just sort of reset things with what have we seen so far this spring at tackle? Who's been where, and what has sort of changed over the course of the spring?
Well, and we've seen Josh Fryar with the ones at left tackle constantly and consistently. I don't know that we've seen anybody else with the ones there. When I've seen him, he's been backed up by George Fitzpatrick. Right tackle has been a combination of Zen Michalski and Tegra Tshabola. I've seen more of Zen Michalski with the ones than Tegra, but they both have been in there. And so that's where things are right now. And based on what Ryan Day has said, questions can be asked in a like, would you like to speak glowingly about this position? And instead, it's more of answers with concern in his voice.
Yeah, and you're never going to hear a coach say, we're going to win the national championship this year. Just like you're never going to hear a coach say, these guys are bums. And, and frankly, I don't think they're necessarily in either of those points right now where, Ryan Day was asked at one point, is when you are watching film, how do you tell, is it these guys just aren't good enough versus they're not being coached enough versus they just haven't had enough reps right now or whatever else it is. And, he made a point to say, like, this is not these guys aren't good enough. These guys are players who can play at the Ohio State level. They're just not there right now. And I think that's the tricky part of this process for them, where these guys are potentially Ohio State, Big Ten championship, national championship contending kind of level players, but they're not there yet. And then you get into the tricky balancing act of, okay, how long can you wait for them to get to that level before you kind of have to pull the trigger and do something in the portal?
Well, and the tough part is they're through 13 or 14 practices at this point, and you'll get through 15 before you have to decide. And the transfer portal opens on Saturday, the day of the spring game. It's open for 2 weeks. They will regather themselves after the spring game and assess, because as Ryan Day said, sometimes you can't see why things are happening poorly, and you lose the forest for the trees, that sort of thing. You have to sit back and assess each player, their entire body of work in the spring, and see what the issues are. And what he said, it's either could be coaching, could be experience, or it's just the player's not good enough at that point. And he believes that players they lack experience, but they're getting more experience. But it's really difficult when you think the player might get there. And you have to be right about that, as opposed to going into portal and getting some insurance. But as he said, it's like you think you know what you're getting into portal, but you don't know until they show up that way either. So it's tough to have a sure thing unless you're going and getting like Michigan with Olu Oluwatimi a couple years ago. You bring in the Remington finalist, you got a pretty good idea. That's not the situation right now. Maybe it becomes that situation, like if somebody shows up in the portal where it's like, well, that is definitely an upgrade. Even if we don't know how good he would be, that guy would be an upgrade over what we have at right tackle or left tackle. But until that person is there, I guess you sit tight with what you've got and hope that they will get better, because as Ryan Day also said, he was concerned about Paris Johnson at this point a year ago. Right,
and you're through, even after the spring game, you're through 15 practices. You have basically double that during the course of the summer. So, it feels like, oh boy, they're so, they only have so many practices. You get to fall camp and all of a sudden, boom, the season's almost here. See, but the weird thing is you don't have any practices for the next, like second half of April, May, June, July. And then by the time you actually have these guys back out on the field and repping 11 on 11 again, then it's too late. Then it's the night before the final, and if you start studying then, like, oh boy, I've tried that before. It doesn't always work great. So you kind of have to make these decisions based on incomplete information, because right now, first of all, you don't know who's who's going to be in the portal because the portal hasn't opened yet. You may have some sense, you may have an idea. Guys who are on smaller programs, lower level programs, who are, like the best guy on that program, those are guys who you potentially could envision entering the portal, kind of the Jonah Jackson model. Like he was an all Big Ten type offensive lineman where, like Olu Olumatimi, you kind of knew what you were getting when you brought him in, and that's sort of been the model of the guy they've brought in the past. Who's going to be in the portal in 2 days? Well, that's an open question. It almost feels like the old Potter Stewart. You'll know it when you see.
Yep.
I know it when I see it. When you see a tackle in the portal, it feels like you'll kind of know it when you see it, and then it's a matter of if that guy's there, you go get him. But boy, this has to be a little bit of a nerve-wracking time for them as they're trying to make this decision and balance the team chemistry issues and the wanting to win now versus, hey, if you start these guys this year and they're not as good this year, but then they have more experience and they're better for next year. There's so many factors here you got to balance.
Yeah, and even going after guys in the portal and not getting them, that still says something to your current team. Honestly, it should be motivation. And that was also one of the things that Ryan Day talked about on Wednesday with the secondary, how the additions of Jihad Carter and Davison Igbinosun had raised the entire room. Haven't really said that about Victor Cutler at this point, still learning the offense and playing essentially a new position. But you can bring guys in, and that doesn't mean they're starting. And that can raise that could almost be the impetus of what some of these guys need to finally get where they're supposed to be. But I can hear people saying, well, you can't worry about feelings, and that's true. But you have to worry about chemistry, and that's something that they're always concerned about. You wonder, this after the season is generally when everybody who is looking for something bigger jumps in. The spring, there are some. You mentioned Jonah Jackson. There were others that year as well. But the spring so often is guys leaving when they see that this is not the place for me. I'm not going to play here, so I'm going to have to leave. And that is not exactly who Ohio State is going to be looking for. Somebody who can't play somewhere else. That's not really, shouldn't even be on necessarily their radar unless it's, Dawand Jones leaving because he can't play in front of Paris Johnson or whatever. That's not happening.
Right, and there's going to be a huge, I would anticipate a huge inflow of players into the portal at every position. Guys who are, we've seen guys who are veterans at Ohio State who are not in the 2 deep right now, or not even in the 3 deep right now. And so you figure, okay, maybe that's someone who'd be thinking about jumping in the portal. But man, the number of players in the portal is going to be enormous. The number of players in the portal at positions of need for Ohio State who are good cultural fits at Ohio State, who are also, at the talent level that they need. I mean, that is a vanishingly small number. It's like, it feels like okay, there's going to be 150 tackles in the portal. 2 of them will fit what Ohio State needs in all of those different areas, and then can you get 1 of those 2 or 2 of those 2 or whatever the number is? And I think listening to Ryan Day talk about this on Wednesday, it felt like his level of comfort with Josh Fryar is higher than his level of comfort with Zen Michalski and Tegra Tshabola at the right tackle position. And I mean, that probably makes sense. Josh Fryar was kind of ahead of those guys last year. And with Josh Fryar, it might be if they bring in one tackle, if they bring in one tackle, it feels like you probably kick Josh Fryar from left tackle to right tackle, and then you feel better about things at 2 different spots. But, even Josh Fryar, and the season is not starting today, but Josh Fryar, he was asked, are you willing to kind of like stamp him give him the stamp of approval, the grape job sticker, that you have won the left tackle job? And it was like, no, not yet.
Yeah, and that's where it's like, oh, some alarm bells start going off. Now he does believe like you could. Obviously, he said they're all good enough to get there, but can they get there in the time that they need? And now you wonder, like, if they bring in, if they find a couple of guys that they want, and they bring in a couple of guys that they want, is this something where they could put Fryar back at guard and say, Matt Jones, we kind of need you at center, that sort of thing, where now it's not quite like mercenary school, but you're bringing in 2 top guns, and then you're going for your best possible lineup, because Carson Hinsman was not brought up once today, or on Wednesday, in terms of asking Ryan Day about what's going on, and that's just because nobody asked about him, but he's been a guy that has been pretty solid from what we've seen. Isn't necessarily a concern, although who knows what answer there would have been had he been asked about.
Well, and he was asked about him maybe a week ago and said, done a good job. Are you willing to sort of say he's won the starting job? No.
Exactly.
So you're still kind of in that same general boat where, yeah, it's progress, but you're not there yet. And it felt like coming out of spring ball last year, we knew you could basically write it in ink. Here are the starting 5 offensive linemen. They feel pretty good about them. This is who it's going to be. This year, it doesn't necessarily feel like that. And, I'm sure there will be finger pointing at Justin Fry where, you look at some of the guys they missed on in the end of the Greg Stidwara era. Boy, there are a couple names you could plug into this offensive line and maybe feel a little bit better. But yeah, that's going to be something that's going to be very interesting to watch, because Ryan Day talked about the fact that, guys who trying to block JT Tuimoloau out had a challenge of that during practice. He mentioned Kenyatta Jackson as someone he was really interested in seeing on Saturday in the Horseshoe, doing it in front of everyone. It's going to be real interesting to watch what these tackles look like going up against, it's not quite live fire because you're not going after the you can't tackle the quarterback, but a bunch of this is going to be tackle. They're doing a little bit of thud and then a bunch of tackle later on. It's going to be real interesting to see what these guys look like, because we've seen a decent amount, but we're going to see a lot more, and we're going to have, you'll have a much better vantage point to see how it goes. So that'll be very interesting to see. And what are you expecting on Saturday? Is this, we saw Jack Sawyer with 4 sacks a couple of years ago. Are we in line for a whole bunch of disruption from the pass defense?
I think so, and with the one-hand touch being a sack, and happy Wednesday to everybody. We can't hide it now. That's just normally what happens. I'm looking forward to seeing Kyle McCord escape. It would have been fantastic to be able to see Devin Brown. Obviously, that's not going to happen. Ryan Day talking about Tristan Gebbia's ability to make quick decisions. We'll see that on hand. So I don't expect a great day for the tackles. I might be looking for some individual good days where, I still remember last year, George Fitzpatrick impressed me with what he was able to do. It did catch my ear when Ryan Day mentioned going against pass rushers like JT, Jack, Kenyatta Jackson. The fact that he mentioned Kenyatta Jackson with those three tells you, with those two, tells you the kind of spring he's had. I do wonder, though, what happens, and back to the portal, Ohio State finds a couple of people that they like. Can they outbid? Can they win that auction?
Yeah, and Ryan Day was asked a bunch about NIL on Wednesday and talked about that they have kind of taken some strides. I think he's come a long way mentally, maybe with it since December when they missed out on some guys because of NIL. And you never really hear players or coaches talking about we won this guy because of NIL. You'll sort of hear the quiet they paid for him essentially. Officially, you can't, Tony. Let's make sure you can't officially. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they bring in a tackle. That I think is probably a good sign in terms of not only the offensive line, but also maybe the health of the NIL ecosystem at Ohio State, where that may help make some of those decisions, because you got lots of on-field stuff to sell, but other people have on-field stuff to sell, and lots of other people are in the market for tackles and edge rushers and all of the things that you need to make a healthy and vibrant football team that can win football games. So we are going to be at Ohio Stadium on Saturday, and you may be too. If you are, let's just run through real quick some of the things you'll need to know. Parking is free except for the West Stadium lot. You can park in pretty much anywhere else. The North St. John lot is restricted for folks with handicap placards, but most anywhere else, if you get there early enough, it's kind of first come first serve free parking. Do not come from the south or the southwest of the stadium. The bridge kind of from Lenox to Cannon Drive, that sounds like that's closed off. There's all sorts of construction on Cannon Drive where they're tearing down the old Drake Union apparently. So that's all shut down there. So you are going to want to come from the northwest, like you get off at Lane Avenue, come down High Street, come up from the south, but come the southeast, come from the east, come across from like 71 and come across 11th Avenue or Hudson or whatever, you do not want to come from the Southwest. Do not try and drive from Lenox to the stadium, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's closed there. So just keep that in mind as you're sort of planning out your day. 50,000 seats were sold. That's what we were told on Wednesday. I'm sure that number will go up some with the forecast looking delightful. But a good number of folks coming in. The advice, as always, Tony, arrive early. We arrive early for work reasons, but also for convenience reasons. You should do the same. The earlier you get there, the better your parking spot will be. So there you go. There's your little pro tip for the day. Enjoy the spring game. Should be a wonderful day. We will be out there again. If you see us, say hi. And if you don't see us, well, you can see us on YouTube at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. We'll be doing a whole bunch of coverage from around the game. We always end up walking away with that from that game with a lot of things that we've learned. Should be a very busy recruiting weekend as well. So make sure you check that all out at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.